the kid you hear playing the piano. He's not mine. On top of the 2 weekly piano lessons and finger yoga, I give my son Smarty Pants vitamins to support his brain health because while I'm supposed to say it's not a competition, of course it's a f***ing competition. Choose Smarty Pants vitamins to support your kid's brain health and help them master whatever their chopsticks may be. Shop on Amazon, smartypantsvitamins.com, or at Target today.
Today's top story, the flavor merger of the century between the Peanut Butter Group and Chocolatey Corp. Joining me is a PBC executive.
Thanks for having me, Barry.
Now, how did you know the merger and the byproduct of it, Jif peanut butter and chocolate flavored spread, would be a success?
You know, it was a gut feeling, a rumbling, if you will. Besides, they're 2 titans of taste.
Very true. Goes great with pretzels.
And pancakes.
Apples too, I bet. Try Jif PBC today.
Learning through play starts with Lego Duplo. With Lego Duplo, toddlers can develop real-life skills while having fun with colorful bricks made just for them. Large, easy to grip, and safe to explore. When children express themselves with Lego Duplo, they build patience, problem-solving, and empathy. See your child learn perseverance and self-expression with everything they imagine and create. Visit lego.com/preschool to learn more.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. In Betsy Lerner's novel, Shred Sisters, younger sister Amy Shred lives in her older sister's shadow from birth. She watches as Olivia, called Ollie, breaks through every rule and boundary and expectation held up for her, first by family, then later by schools and jobs, boyfriends, and recovery centers. Ollie is unforgettably beautiful, popular in school, and deeply unwell. Amy carves a path in seeming opposition to her sister, near perfection in school, a tireless worker and rule follower, slow to engage with boys and men. But as she ages, she finds her sister's presence everywhere in her decisions, in her desires and her mistakes, with Ollie drifting in and out of her life, demanding loyalty and often money and shelter. As Ollie leaves a burning trail of personal disaster in her wake, Amy and her family will have to come to terms with how much and how often to put out fires, clean up messes, and rescue Ollie from herself. Shred Sisters is a novel about the ways family ties fray and unravel, leaving us untethered. But it's also a story of resilience, patience, kindness, and empathy for even those that hurt us most deeply. Amy and Ollie, stars in orbit around each other, come to us in Betsy Lerner's exquisite and delicate prose. Shred Sisters is in turn deeply sorrowful and riotously funny. Betsy asks us to imagine ourselves the unforgettable sibling without insisting that it be Amy or Ollie, but only that we never forget that we might be the other sister as well. Betsy Lerner is the author of The Bridge Ladies, The Forest for the Trees, and Food and Loathing. With Temple Grandin, she is the co-author of the New York Times bestseller Visual Thinking, The Hidden Gifts of People Who Think in Pictures, Patterns, and Abstractions. She received an MFA from Columbia University in poetry, where she was selected as one of Penn's emerging writers. She also received the Tony Godwin Publishing Prize for Editors. After working as an editor for 15 years, she became an agent and currently a partner with Dunau, Carlson, and Lerner Literary Agency. Welcome to Burned by Books, Betsy Lerner.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
I'm so pleased that you're here, and I'm actually going to have you start with the opening of the novel, which gives us a sense of how, from the very earliest, Ollie's chaotic and seemingly no holds barred way of taking on life is shadowing over Amy's existence right from the start. Would you mind reading us that?
Sure. I was afraid to wake up my dad. He was stretched out on the couch in his den, late afternoon, his brown loafers kicked off on the shag carpet, resting on each other like rabbits. This better be good, Amy. He never used my full name. It was Aim or A or Acorn, Bun or Bunny. By the time he reached Ollie, she was soaked in blood. Ollie had dared me to jump on the couch with her, using the thick cushions as a trampoline. She made a swishing sound as she jumped, touching the ceiling and dunking an imaginary basketball. Only when she took a jump shot from the side, not realizing the power in her legs, she crashed into the picture window behind the couch. For a second, there was silence. Then the window splintered into a web of shards that rained down on my sister. She shook her head, and pieces of glass flung like water from a summer sprinkler. She froze in place, afraid to take a step or move. Tiny spots of blood blossomed from beneath her shirt and pants. My father told me to call 911 for an ambulance, then soothed Ollie with his deep voice. It's going to be okay, honey. Stay still. Ollie hadn't moved a millimeter, knowing that doing so would push the shards of glass deeper into her skin. Now, in partial shock, she couldn't speak. Later, she joked that she looked like a giant tampon. But just then, her wit was on hold.
Thank you so much. This is such an evocative and just terrifying scene, but also, that tampon line gives a sense of how much you have humor that sort of courses through even the bleakest moments in this book. And I'm wondering how the picture of Amy and Ollie together as foils, as doppelgangers came to you, and whether it was always about these two sisters or whether that evolved as the novel did.
I've been obsessed and defined by my sibling relationships my whole life, so I think it was always right beneath the surface. I am one of 3 sisters. There are 2 in the book. I had a very unusual childhood in that there were 3 of us, and then the little one died, and then there were the 2 of us, and then 10 years later, another baby was born, another girl, and so I think I was I was the middle, then the youngest, then the middle, and there was all of this grief surrounding our family, and my older sister and I split and each aligned ourselves with one of our parents, so I think a lot of what came out or came through in my subconscious was all of this family history roiling.
I mean, that just description of your biography sounds worthy of a novel unedited into. But it's interesting that you came to these 2 sisters. I have a question about your turn as a novelist. I mean, this is such an accomplished and beautiful novel. One would think that you had been writing these for years. But you've had a successful career as an editor and now agent, and as the writer of mostly nonfiction, and you were trained as a poet. What made you turn to the novel form, and why was that the genre in which this story needed to be told?
Well, thank you for those nice compliments. The piece of writing that nobody knows about is that I wrote 7 screenplays over the last 20 years.
Oh my gosh.
And that was my real love. I was kicked out of NYU Film School, actually, freshman year.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
What happened?
I wanted to be a screenwriter. Well, first of all, it wasn't the big famous NYU Film School it is now. It was actually a fledgling program, but you didn't really have to show much to get in, and all the other students were quite accomplished, and I'd made about 4 Super 8 movies. And people were just running, circles around me, and my professor basically told me that I should leave the program and do some reading and get get a humanities degree and come back to filmmaking when I had something to say. So that was
Gosh.
that was
That's
rough.
that's like such a kneecapping.
Yeah, it was really rough. I also had a massive crush on him, so it was just
Oh,
horrible on every level as
okay.
an 18, 19-year-old. But in a lot of and that set me on my, my English degree and my career in publishing, but the dream of screenwriting never ended, and I started again in my 40s, and while I had a couple of close calls and nothing produced, I think that I was learning how to become a storyteller in the fictional, space, as they say. I think that's how I was able to write fiction. I think all that training and then everything else, the poetry, editing so many people, putting so many books together, reading my whole life, blogging for a decade. I've just always been writing. I have diaries and diaries. So I don't, yes, I was born with this novel at 64, but I think it took 40 years of learning and work and writing.
I mean, now it makes complete sense. Although I do have a question. Formally, screenwriting has sort of some absolutes to it, at least if you're going to sell something, and it moves with paces that are, in some ways, understood. And I wonder if you found writing a novel that you could employ that same sense of pacing and timing that's pretty formally set in screenwriting, but in a novel can be much more loosely understood.
I think I did apply what I learned. My very first screenplay, there was a very big deal producer attached. And the first thing he said to me is, "Darling, you're not Woody Allen. It's not all about dialogue. You have to learn how to write action."
Mm.
And I think that's a mistake that a lot of fledgling screenwriters make. We all think it's dialogue, but it's really action and how you turn the scenes. And I was very aware of that writing. I also mostly read nonfiction and work on nonfiction, and I don't have a ton of patience for a lot of description. And I want to know what happens next, but I'm also not just a plotter. I do have poetry and literary aspirations, and I really admire beautiful writing. I also, Ishigur is also one of my favorite authors, and the art of understatement is something that I care deeply about. So I
Mm,
think
mm.
I bring a lot of different ideas about writing or what I like to write or read, coming from all of these different places, as opposed to someone who's just been working on developing their craft as a fiction writer. If that makes sense?
Oh, it does. It so does. And it's interesting. Alice Elliott Dark loves this novel. I mean, she blurbed it, but she also loves it. And Fellowship Point, I think, is one of the most beautiful stories of a relationship and how that relationship bears out over time. But I think of her as such a poetic and lyric prose writer, and I think she saw that in you as well in her descriptions of it. And so it's funny to think of yourself as a plotting expert, but also, as you say, carrying poetic inclinations in there and understatement. It's all coming together for me as a nice puzzle as to why I love this book so much.
No, thank you. And Alice is a master, and I also loved that novel. And yeah, having her praise was about, I really, it was the highest praise I could have imagined.
Mm.
Mm.
I love that. So Shred Sisters is ultimately Amy's story. She's our narrative perspective and our protagonist, but this is a novel about the inescapability of her sister's influence over every aspect of her life. As the gorgeous cover aptly depicts, Ollie is the doppelganger and the shadow that follows Amy throughout her life. Interestingly, much of Ollie's life occurs off screen, and we hear about it secondhand. Tell us about the idea of the inescapably troubled sister, and also how you decided to have Ollie's worst behavior happen outside of the reader's vision.
Well, that was certainly the limitation of a first person narrator. And that was the most challenging thing to contend with. And certainly my editors, she had two big points, and one of them was Ollie disappears for too much of the book. And I had to devise ways of, as you say, in a secondhand way, bringing her back in so that she had a strong enough presence. That was a challenge. I hope that I met that. But I also, for me, and certainly for a lot of the fiction I really like, is voice driven. So
Yeah.
I didn't really ever think of writing it from, a third person limited point of view where I could also get into Ollie's head. Though, were I to make this a movie, I would completely do it that way. They would each be equal characters, and we'd see all those scenes that we hear about Ollie, we'd get to see them. And I do see them in my mind's eye, but I had to, figure out ways to animate what she was doing, and so that her legacy and her imprint and her shadow would be there with Amy at all times. And that was a very deliberate thing I had to do in revision.
If you're the casting director, who's playing Amy and Ollie?
Well, my dream for Ollie is Florence Pugh.
Oh, yes. Oh, perfect. Perfect.
And my dream for Amy is an actress people don't seem to recognize her name all that much, is Thomasin McKenzie. She was
I recognize it. What's she been in?
Yeah, she was in Jojo Rabbit, if you saw that.
Mm-hmm,
She was in Eileen.
I didn't see
She
that.
she was also she's she can appear very plain and very withdrawn, but you can always see her mind working, and that's what I just love about her.
Yeah, you need that for Amy because it's the intellect is churning and trying to deal with emotions and things that don't compute. What does it mean for the Shred family that while she's living at home, Ollie determines whether or not others can be happy or comfortable, that she sucks the oxygen out of every room and every event?
I think it's sadly something that happens in families when there is somebody with mental illness. They are the magnet for attention, negative and positive. That's what I've learned on this entire book tour. I thought people were really going to want to talk about sibling relationships, but almost everywhere I went, numerous people came up to me or put their hand in the air to talk about their mentally ill sibling and how that person, quote unquote, ruined things for everybody. And when it was parents, it was when parents came up to me with adult children with mental illness, the heartbreak was very intense. With siblings, there was actually more of a residue of anger. And I think it is because the quote unquote well sibling is often just left behind. The ill child just takes up all of the, as you said, the oxygen, the energy, often even a lot of money to find help. And, it's a very, people have more sympathy for physical illness. Mental illness is still something people really grapple with because it affects behavior.
When kids don't play, they grow up without creativity. They'll try to blend in and wear chinos, or worse, polyester chinos. Good thing Gushers, Fruit by the Foot, and Fruit Roll-Ups are made to be played with. You better be playing.
This summer, try the new Strato Frappuccino blended beverage at Starbucks. It's the classic blended iced coffee you know and love, now topped with a creamy layer of handcrafted brown sugar cold foam. Available for a limited time. Your Strato Frappuccino is ready at Starbucks.
And the way in which the family is split in trying to figure out how to deal with this lack of oxygen and the constant need for Ollie to have cleanup and money and fires put out. And it gives us this terrible fracture in which her father is forgiving no matter the extent of Ollie's wrongdoing. And her mother critiques her and then seems to give up on her. Amy lives in the middle ground between enabler and truth teller. And Shred Sisters dramatizes the pain created by enabling someone so deeply ill. But it also shows us how much Ollie needs and depends on the loyalty of her sister and father. The novel seems to say that contradiction is an unsolvable one. And I wonder if you would speak to that.
I think it is largely unsolvable unless the person can get well and stay stable. Otherwise, they're always, and especially I think I tried to show in the novel at big moments, graduations, weddings, birthdays. These are when expectations in a family are highest for people to celebrate each other and come together and, honor these big life milestones. And these are typically when somebody with mental illness will either not be there or show up and quote unquote ruin things. it's just one of these, it's impossible because most people, very sadly, even if they get well, they usually, I use the term relapse, which I know is used for addiction, but I think a lot of people with mental illness go off their medication not out of any sort of malice or irresponsibility even. I think they just can't tolerate the medication and they sort of relapse into their illness, and subsequent behaviors, will ensue. And it never gets easier for the family to deal with that.
Amy lives much of her early life as the antithesis of Ollie, a perfect student who is cautious, even fearful of stepping out of line of her parents' and school's expectations. But as she matures, her relationships begin to show signs of Ollie's presence, even when Ollie isn't physically there. In particular, her complicated relationship with Josh, a manic actor and addict himself. Do you see Amy seeking out intimacy with men as a substitute for Ollie's absence in her life? And if so, what is it that that Amy is craving of Ollie?
I think in the case of Josh, she's craving some of that chaos and excitement. I think that Josh is also the daring person, the person who leads. I mean, she not only loses her virginity to him, but really he shows her a wider world outside of her studies. And clearly within the family, Amy was never going to do any of that on her own. It was Ollie who was the adventurer, who took all the risks and jumped off the cliff. And always, I said, first in and last out. So Josh provides all of that for her and also really relies on her, depends on her, and will ultimately betray her. I don't think when I wrote Josh, I had any of that in mind. These are things
No. Oh, really?
people pointed these things out to me much later, other readers, which sort of astonished me. I didn't think, oh, Josh is a replacement for Ollie, but now I see it very clearly. One of my best friends took his life some years ago, and I think that character sort of subconsciously I was writing about Josh. I was writing about him without also really knowing that. This whole process of writing fiction for me has been, Freud would have a field day with me, let's put it that way.
He would with all of us, let's be honest. Josh was one of the most impactful characters for me, and the way that he comes in and out of Amy's life and is both someone who sees Amy and sees her for things that she doesn't think she is, as beautiful and interesting and fascinating and worthy of time and conversation. But he's also a narcissist and completely obsessed with his own pet projects and his failed acting career. And so I wanted to hear a little bit more about your thoughts about Josh.
Well, I lived in New York for 25 years, and I burned through a lot of people, and in the great project of figuring out who I was. And there are so many people in New York who are these kind of cosmic hustlers, and they come into your life for a while and they show you a world, and they can be very seductive and very destructive and very beautiful. I definitely had some magical people in my life, especially in my 20s in New York. And in many ways, I think Josh, I guess I'll just sidetrack and say, on some level, I always wanted the book to be a love letter to loneliness in New York. Amy is exquisitely lonely, and New York to me is the city where, some people, if you can make it there, you make it anywhere. But I really went to the city for anonymity and to be an observer and watch the human parade. And Josh is one of those people who is in the parade,
That's a great description. I think that for as much as Amy resents Ollie, there are things about Ollie's life that she desperately longs from. The freedom from expectations, dismissal of arbitrary rules, especially for women, and living for her own needs and desires. And I wonder if that is wrapped up in this antagonistic relationship, that Ollie, because of mental illness, does indeed get to throw off some of the shackles of being a young but maturing woman in the world.
100%. And I certainly see this, all the time in families when there's one sibling. It doesn't even have to be mental illness, just who's really high achieving or incredibly charismatic or very beautiful or has all the boyfriends or opportunities. And other siblings, it makes them crazy. It's sibling rivalry and competition. I think is a huge and birth order. I think these are big elements of people's lives that I mean, I'm finding people talking about it quite a lot. I really felt I grew up in a quite a heated sibling situation. I've always had my nose pressed to the bakery glass when I see siblings who get along really well and really love each other and have each other's backs.
Mm.
That's was not my experience. I just tried to capture that between these two girls.
Yeah, and it's and Ollie is such an attractive figure, clearly, to people in the novel, especially early on. And it's hard not to just feel for Amy, watching her sort of the sun shining, seeming only on her, and yet there's such destructiveness in that. And that turns me to the fact that this novel deals with some really heavy subjects: mental illness, infidelity, drug addiction, trauma, and loss. But I believe it's ultimately a story of human beings as beautiful creatures, even in their vast complications and failures, and that tenderness and care are our greatest affordances as a species. And that connected to me to an idea that comes through for me in the therapy with Paul, the
Mhm.
therapist. I just interviewed Lauren Elkin, who wrote Scaffolding. I don't know
Mhm.
if you read that.
I haven't.
It's a really beautiful novel, and it's almost entirely about therapy. And therapy has a role in the Shred Sisters, but it isn't a dominant thing. But I think it's really important for Amy in terms of her understanding of the complications of being a human. And I wonder if you'd talk about Paul and what therapy is doing here.
Amy is so locked in and she's not really had friends. That goes back to Josh, why he's so important. He's really her first actual friend, even if he's, kind of a hustler in some way, sponging off of her or however you want to look at it. He was also offering friendship. She's isolated. She does not understand what the effect of Ollie is on her. She sees that her parents have divorced. She knows that it's really impacted her family in very negative ways. But without therapy, there was no way for Amy to even begin to understand her own pain and isolation. And she has that previous experience with a therapist in college who, I don't know if you remember, who's, says, I'll never abandon you, and then takes a job at another college
Oh, yes, that's right.
and leaves her the dream catcher, which is, of course, quite ironic for Amy. She's not catching any dreams anytime soon. But so there's that bad experience with the therapist, and then there's also the family therapy in the hospital and a kind of, commentary on that kind of treatment and medication. But then there's Paul, who is just a great listener, and he also dares every now and then to open the door for her a little bit to look at herself, and he winds up really being the only true constant in her life. But he's
Mhm.
also, his goal is to help her become herself and move on. And I think that's the movement through the book with Paul. And no one else has brought him up. So I'm so happy you did, because I think it's really a central part of Amy's, learning about herself and moving in however many steps forward she's able to take.
Well, I mean, now that you've used the word constant, that he's one of the few constants in her life, I just see him so clearly now as that thing that will always have her best interest at heart. And she can't count on that from even her parents because they're, become increasingly self-interested and they're obviously always worried about Ollie and the men in her life, her two marriages. I hasten to not use the word marriage for the second one for various reasons, but she does have two marriages, and both of those are not constants for her. And I think that's such a driver in our lives, that we seek for people who will be a constant. Do you think that's true?
Yes, I mean, when that first marriage dissolves in under a year, she's devastated. And it's Paul who saw her through that. And you're absolutely right. She couldn't even count on her parents, and she hasn't had friends. And Paul, I love the way you said, had her best interest in mind. She needed somebody to have that. And she was fortunate to find it in a therapist, because that isn't either always the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it ends up, being something that she can have as a little bit of a North Star in such an unsettled life. Before I let you go, Betsy, I'm interested to hear if there's anything you've been reading and loving recently that you'd like to recommend.
Yes, well, I've been reading more fiction, and I was recommended this book actually by Alice Dark. And then I saw it pop up again in that By the Book column, in the New York Times Book Review.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Loved and Missed by Susie Boyd, British author. Don't know if you've heard of it, but I think you would love
I
it.
haven't. No.
It is about a grandmother who winds up raising her granddaughter because her daughter is an addict.
Mm.
And it is a book that unfolds in one small scene and observation after another. But to call this book quiet would be a mistake. It's so emotionally gripping, but very little happens. And yet you feel completely in the world of this grandmother. And also there's no exploiting the character of the addict. There's nothing sensational about her, which also makes it, in my mind, so much more real.
So good, so good, so good.
Ready to rack to school and save big? Get to your Nordstrom Rack store today for thousands of deals from just $20.
Because I want to look fresh.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
I got a new backpack.
Score everyone's favorite denim, sneakers, boots, and activewear from Nike, Levi's, Steve Madden, Madewell, and Free People. Great brands, great prices. Everyone's got a reason to rack. Shop Nordstrom Rack and make it the best school year ever.
This episode is brought to you by the world's first reposado from Tequila Herradura. Made with slow-cooked, hand-harvested agave sealed into oak barrels and aged 11 months. Before being enjoyed in your glass. Experience the world's first reposado. Tequila Herradura. Please drink responsibly. Responsibility.org. Tequila Herradura. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Brown-Forman, Louisville, Kentucky. Herradura is a registered trademark. Copyright 2025 Brown-Forman Corporation.
Yeah, and a rarity, sadly. I feel like that character is so often exploited for stereotype or plot turns. So a true relationship with a complicated addict sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And then also, I was so blown away by your podcast with the author of Margot's Got Money Troubles.
Oh yeah, Rufy. Yeah.
I devoured that book in about two sittings. The first person narrator, the way she goes back and forth with that, the humanity of all of those characters, also the humor in it, I was blown away. And then getting to hear her talk about it was fascinating. So I highly recommend that book as well. I know you do too, but I loved it.
She's so, I mean, talking to her, I understood how she was able to have such a funny and lively and unforgettable narrative voice, because she herself is all those things. but I did. I loved that book. And I don't know, do you ever pay attention to the tournament of books that happens this year, this time every year?
No.
So the Morning News, which is just really a kind of a literary magazine, an online literary magazine, has for over a decade, maybe 2 decades, done right around March Madness. They do a tournament of the best books of the year, and what they do is they do a bracket, and then each book that's in competition with each other, they have a notable author basically read them both and then do an analysis and say who, quote unquote, wins. And they move through the tournament. It's very fun and funny. I have been on it they have sort of like, peanut gallery comments after the author's decision. And I've done that, which is really fun. But Margot's Got Money Troubles made it to the nearly the very last, to the semifinals this year. And I thought that was very fitting.
Amazing. Who won?
We don't know yet. It happens today, actually. The final is between James, not surprisingly, and Martyr.
I see. Well, I would have voted for Rufy, honestly. That was it just I don't like this term that everyone's been using in publishing for the last decade, sweet spot.
Yeah, they have.
I don't know why I'm so allergic to it when it actually so perfectly describes her book to me, because I am myself, I think, on the cusp of commercial and literary. And and when I did read a lot of fiction in my 20s before I got into the nonfiction business, those were The Good Mother was like one of the first contemporary novels I read. And, every chapter was a cliffhanger, but it was also character driven, not just plot driven. And I think she just does that so well.
Yeah, she really does. Yeah, I was rooting for her. But I just want to take a moment and root for Shred Sisters by Betsy Lerner. This is such a wonderful portrait of a painful and, in many ways, devastating sibling relationship that nevertheless shapes the younger sibling, Amy, in dramatic and unexpected ways. And I loved the prose of it. I loved the storytelling. And as you can see, even from just that beginning section that you read, there's so much to be loved in the play of it. So thank you for coming on, Betsy. It was such a pleasure to get to talk to you.
Thank you. Likewise. Really my pleasure.
Well, that's all from me for now. My giant thanks to Betsy Lerner for coming on to talk about her wonderful novel, Shred Sisters. You can find links to purchase Shred Sisters and all of Betsy's recommended books at the website Burned by Books. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, including the one with Rufy Thorpe, where we talk about Betsy's recommendation, Margot's Got Money Troubles. You can find also links to buy a podcast t-shirt and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.